Globally, less than 5% of all media coverage is of women's sports, and globally, less than 1% of all corporate sponsorship dollars support women's sport. We need more role models, more Indian girls and women coming to the US, playing, being role models for both the girls back home in India, as well as, quite frankly, the girls here who are Indian American. Individual women's sports like tennis and golf, they do a really good job of an individual athlete becoming a household name like Serena Williams. But team sports are a little harder to think through about building a household name.
Well, I have a treat for you. This is a really special conversation. I'm in conversation today with Cathy Engelbert. She is the commissioner of the WNBA, or the Women's National Basketball Association. She has been now since July 2019. And before that, she was CEO of Deloitte. Now, a lot of you will sit up and say, what? WNBA? Why are we talking about this? Because why not? But to be completely honest with you, Cathy has been a role model for so many women across the world that we actually started talking about, doing a conversation with her around Women's Day. But she's also a very busy person, and it took us a very long time to sort of line this up. And in my opinion, every day is Women's Day. So here we are, because we finally managed to get some time with her. And I'm doing this particularly for young girls who want to be athletes, who want to be sportswomen, who are worried about all of the extra hurdles that are placed before girls who want to do this. Pay is not the same. There's a challenge of everything being downgraded for women athletes, and we see that in India as well. And we're having a conversation with someone who's beaten all of these odds in the boardrooms and risen to the absolute top of the corporate world, and then has taken all of these ideas and moved it into sports to sort of even out literally the playing field for women in basketball. And I'm hoping that we learn a bunch of things from this interview that we can then apply to our own careers and to our own lives. And I never get tired of talking to women who are inspirations for all of us. So I'm so happy that Cathy finally managed to give us some time to have this conversation. Cathy, welcome. I know that it has been a completely challenging year for women's basketball in the US as well. But you've talked about how your experience as CEO of Deloitte has helped you navigate the COVID year. It's also a year that women in India, in sports and in other careers, have struggled with. But tell us how you did it. How did you manage to pull WNBA through the COVID year?
Yeah, Faye, first, it's great to be here. I always treasured my trips to India when I was at Deloitte, and always have fond memories of visiting your country. Obviously, something I learned pretty quickly coming in from a business background into sports is that there isn't as much of a difference at leading Deloitte and now leading the WNBA from sports are really big business, and business is, after all, about relationships. And, while the stakeholders are a bit different, and this past year has been incredibly challenging for all of us globally, my background in scenario planning at Deloitte came in handy when the pandemic hit about a year ago. There's just so much to learn from managing in a crisis. And I've been around in the working world since 1986. And, a crisis is a time where your weaknesses get amplified, but also it's a time to fix things. So we tried to innovate during our WNBA season last year in a bubble, by the way, in the state of Florida, where we could go and safely get, the appropriate level of testing and put on a competitive season. But, it was always about our player and staff health and safety. And, it was quite a year, but we successfully did it. Quite frankly, from a business perspective, to have been out of the sports landscape for more than 20 months, which is what it would have been if we had canceled the season last year, would have been pretty existential for a league of our size and scale. So we're so proud that our players accomplished so much momentum coming into this, our 25th season that we're tipping off in a little over a month. And so we're really excited for, having highlighted these women. Our league is one of the most diverse league in professional sports here in the United States, and their strong voices on things like social justice, which I'm sure we'll get into. And it just really created a lot of momentum and a loud voice of the women of the WNBA.
The fact that your aim when you took up this job, and it was a completely different landscape. CEO of Deloitte taking up, chairmanship of the Women's National Basketball Association. You said it's about how women are valued as sports people, what they get paid, what their benefits are, what their what their travel is like, where they stay, all of these things, which tends to be different for men and women in sports all across the world. And the argument invariably is that sports that men play attract more audiences and hence more money, and there's more money coming in, and that cycle is difficult to break at this point. So what was your rebuttal to that argument?
Yeah, so I mean, there's an absolute, transformation of women's sports going on in the United States and hopefully globally, and that's why we hope to bring our platform globally. But I was 4 days on the job, Faye, when I showed up at the WNBA All-Star Game in Las Vegas in 2019. And the players had opted out of the prior collective bargaining agreement. And one of the things we had to work on is building trust. So, a lesson, build trust first. And then we were able to work through and negotiate with the players a very progressive and holistic collective bargaining agreement, which, as you mentioned, wasn't just, although we tripled the pay of the top players, but wasn't just about pay and cash compensation. It was about travel conditions. It was about moms and family benefits. It was very holistic, such that we built trust with the players so that when we hit the pandemic, the players would trust us that we could put on a season with the appropriate health and safety. And then the valuation, again, coming off of a successful season, we now have a lot of momentum to actually think about how to transform that valuation, which is based on quantitative metrics that apply in the men's league quite well, but should there be adjustments to evaluate and value women's assets in the sports world. So that's what we're working really hard on to transform. I mean, there's definitely, I think, a lot of momentum. I think there's a lot of companies that want to invest. There's media companies that want to invest in women's sports. So I think we're on the rise, and now it's just getting the valuation model right. But it's going to take a lot of change, and change management and transformation aren't easy for everybody in your ecosystem to actually do. And that's what we're working on so hard right now is driving marketing, building household names, and ultimately that'll drive the value, and that'll drive more fans in. And if we have a better way to digitally engage fans through whether it's second screen experiences or innovative, ways to draw fans in, that's going to lead to higher valuation in the longer term. But it is going to be something we're working on because, as you know, globally, less than 5% of all media coverage is of women's sports, and globally less than 1% of all corporate sponsorship dollars support women's sports. So those are big denominators, but the numerator, if you can just move it by 100 basis points here and there, is going to be a huge advancement for women in sport.
Before you came into the WNBA, a lot of the star players actually walked out saying that the pay was too low and there was too much of a difference between how they were treated and how the men were treated, and they were not okay with that anymore. And that's the point which you came in, and that's where the correction began, correct?
Well, again, the players were playing. Some of them play overseas in the off season. So a lot of them go overseas to supplement their income in the off season. So why we were working really hard to provide this holistic package in the collective bargaining agreement is to have more players stay home in the off season, market the league. We would engage them through league marketing agreements or internships and other things so that they had other ways to supplement their income, but also really train, work on their game, and and ultimately market the league at the same time to help us build them as a household name, which is really important to gain more followers and more viewers. So I think we had a trust issue, which we built trust over that period. The WNBA, before I got here, I give a lot of credit. They launched kind of the new brand, the logo woman that you see on every ball, and now you see in our 25th season anniversary logo. So it's about having a consistent brand, a brand that stands for the power of women and women's equality and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's the path we've been on. And I think we've built that trust over the last couple of years, even before I got here, with the players, to show that we, from the league level, are investing the teams, and the team owners have great relationships with the players. And, again, there's only to go but up, I think.
Have you ever faced sexism yourself when you've gone out to have any of these conversations with sponsors, with corporate brands, where people have said, you know what, we've already put all of our dollars into the men's basketball, so we don't have anything left for you? Give us some instances of what that was like and how you tackled something like that.
Yeah, so the one thing I learned from the business world that companies do take some discretionary dollars, and it's about allocation of their capital, and they want to get the biggest return for their dollars to drive their business. So one of the things I learned is like we have to start talking to the companies. How can WNBA players represent what the business issue that particular company is faced with, and if that business issue is they want to market more to women or women, in communities of color, yeah, check. The WNBA would be great representatives. So part of it's about the narrative at which you go pitch to sponsors about how these amazing athletes, best at their craft in the world, can actually represent the brand and help them solve a problem they have from a business perspective, like if they're not the consumers they're trying to draw in. I mean, we skew more female, we skew more communities of colors in our fan base. So it's a data play too, Faye, and getting all that data and presenting that in a way that attracts a corporate sponsor to the women's game, in addition, to the way they look at their traditional sponsorships on the men's side. So we've made a ton of progress on that. We launched something called WNBA Changemakers. We had 3 changemakers sign up. Well, hopefully we'll have more over the next year. And these are significant long-term sponsors who are really devoted to putting kind of their money where their mouth is on diversity, equity, inclusion. But it was about the narrative. We had to shift it a little bit from the traditional narrative to a narrative about you must support these diverse women because they are the next generation of diverse leadership.
There's the intersection of diversity as well. Women of color, women of the LGBTQI community who also play sports. We've seen American women's soccer or football, as it's called in the rest of the world. Particularly, you strike up a lot of these conversations about diversity of sexual preference and of color within women's sports. And what is the WNBA doing to include other communities as well within the diversity of just bringing women into sports?
Yeah, I think we're probably, one of the most, if not the most diverse professional sports league in America, certainly. And so as we think about we're a league of 80% women of color. We have LGBTQ plus. We have an incredible bunch of moms, entrepreneurs, so other cohort groups, I'll call it. We've got broadcasters, some of our players broadcast. And so, they all are amazing. And so that's why we developed this 5-year business transformation plan. And so it's driven by consumption of our game, engagement of our fans, bringing in more sponsors, getting more media coverage, and getting more breadth of coverage. Last year, we had a 68% increase in average viewership for WNBA games. Why? We had more breadth of coverage. We had more games on platforms, including traditional, television as well as digital platforms. So those are the types of things we need to change the game as far as how we're going to market our sport and market these elite athletes. Because I think, one thing, Faye, I've noticed is in individual women's sports like tennis and golf, yes, they do a really good job of an individual athlete becoming a household name like Serena Williams, like Naomi Osaka now. And I think in the golf world is happening as well. But team sports are a little harder to think through about building a household names. But the men's sports have done that quite well, certainly in the NBA, certainly in MLB and some other sports here in the U.S., certainly in, in soccer or football, cricket, I know, which is very popular in India too. So it is about building these household names, building rivalries between teams so fans want to come watch. And just getting that consumption to a point where we know the game is great, and I know, there's lots of young girls now playing basketball in India, and if they can have these role models and aspire to advance in their, basketball career or just build their leadership skills. I mean, I played basketball in high school and college here in the U.S., and I mean, it like literally set the leadership skills I learned on the basketball court kind of took root in my career. And I mean, I have to give a lot of credit to my early days in sports to helping my confidence to ultimately lead a firm like Deloitte and now the WNBA.
You talked about how, whether it was in college and then again after that in the corporate world, it was all very male dominated. And there were skills that you picked up there in dealing with the male dominated space, whether that was the court or whether it was the boardroom. What were those skills, and what armor did you use, or what strategy did you use when you were the first woman in any of these rooms?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really fortunate to grow up in a family of 8 kids where it was very competitive. We competed for everything, to the parents' time, to cereal in the morning. And so, I think from that perspective, growing up in a competitive environment, 5 brothers. So I grew up, call it, in a male dominated family, but competed with them. And my mom always said, you're going to do fine in the working world because it's very male dominated. This was back in the 80s. And, you're growing up next to five, 5 of them, 5 men, boys at the time. So and then sports. I mean, I was always playing sports in the backyard with my brothers, and then went on to play, for now Naismith Hall of Fame coach Muffet McGraw from Notre Dame. I played for at a smaller university here in the U.S. called Lehigh University. But the resiliency, back then, like, to learning how to lose and learning the lessons of losing and learning how to, practice and how, and it's a great, someone else said it and I just adopted it, it's, you must be your best in your ordinary moments because then you'll be great in the extraordinary ones. And that is such a great lesson from sports. So practice in the ordinary moments. And then when you're faced with a crisis, and this applies in business, you'll be extraordinary and your leadership will show through. So for me, it was resiliency. It was leadership. I captained my senior year teams in college, and just to lead a team as a team captain. There's some studies that show people who captain teams aren't necessarily the best player, which I was not the best player in the court, but they end up building these leadership skills that carry them through their career post sports.
6 Indian girls have received scholarships to move to America and to play basketball, apart from other things. Tell us what that program is like. So is the WNBA open to young women from across the world?
Definitely. I mean, one of my goals also is to make our game more global, like the NBA game has become. I think we have a lot of opportunities to globalize the game and to have our players be role models. I know a bunch of our players have African heritage and they're role models for these young girls in Africa. I think it's great that there are several Indian-born players who are playing in the NCAA and hopefully getting scholarships and things like that. And to globalize our game is going to be something, certainly once we transform our current model and the valuation model. Think about the potential to globalize the game and to have the WNBA come to India, to have the WNBA do kind of a global games. And I know the NBA was there right before the pandemic and how successful that was. So we are definitely interested, but we need more role models, more Indian girls and women coming to the US, playing, being role models for both the girls back home in India, as well as, quite frankly, the girls here who are Indian American or, just come from, communities where that diversity would resonate. So we're excited about the interest in the game. And one of the other things is the confidence that it builds in young girls. So there's a lot of data in our WNBA. We have a WNBA Her Time to Play, junior WNBA that we run with the NBA, including in India. And the potential there and the interest in the game globally. And now the Olympics this year, obviously in Tokyo, will have both the 5-on-5 and 3-on-3 basketball for both men and women. So there'll be more role models that we can show on a global stage. So the more we show this on a global stage, I think the more confidence we build, because the data shows, girls drop out of organized sports at a much higher rate, an alarming higher rate than their male counterparts at 13, 14 years of age. So we need more girls to build that confidence, stay in the game, not necessarily to always play at the college or professional level, but I'm a true believer it helps build their leadership skills for later in life.
Is there a word of advice you'd like to give to Indian girls who are currently playing sports of any kind, hoping to make careers out of it?
Yeah, definitely keep playing and play multiple sports. It doesn't always just have to be basketball. I played 3 sports in high school, 2 in college. I think in some ways the way the tide has gone is now you got to play one sport and be dedicated year round. You also have to have fun doing other things. It can't be all about sports or you'll burn out. So I think it's important to stay in the game, Don't be frustrated from losses. Learn from them, because 30 years later, like me, I remember the lessons from the losses so much better from the joys of the winning. And so, you do have to stick with it. Sports is difficult, but sports, especially team sports, also build so many skills that you'll use later in life. So stay in the game is the advice I'd give.
All right, Cathy, thank you so much for spending time with me this evening and having this conversation. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Faye, and stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.